Namaste, kia ora. Today we are having conversations with Chris Carter, the former Minister of Ethnic Communities and currently the chairperson for Henderson-Massey Local Board. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. Tell us how you've been.
I've been, well, first of all, namaste and Sat Sri Akal, and I've been fine,
Yes.
and I'm very happy today to talk about mental health issues and addiction. As a former MP for Te Atatu, as a former teacher, and as a former member of the Waitemata District Health Board, it's an issue that I've dealt with in my professional life, and it's a very important issue in the community.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, and we'll start with talking about the sensitivity around something like mental health and addiction in the ethnic communities, and being a public figure such as yourself. How do you go about starting these conversations in the community?
Yeah, these conversations are always difficult in all communities that live in New Zealand, Aotearoa. Mental health has always had a stigma about it, whether it's to do with addiction or more serious mental health conditions. Somehow I think all people can relate to an illness that's tangible, that you can see, whether it's cancer or heart condition or pneumonia. All of those physical conditions are somehow familiar. Mental health issues are far less tangible, and so people are unsure how to relate to them, and many people will feel that the presence of a family member that has mental health conditions is somehow shameful, and you have to destigmatize that. So I think that's quite challenging, not just in ethnic communities, but actually in all communities in New Zealand.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're right. When they have a physical illness, it's completely okay to go see a GP. It's completely okay to see a doctor. But when they're not feeling well emotionally, then there's always that hesitation. And I think for a lot of South Asian countries, something such as mental health, something such as addiction is not openly talked about. It's not a topic of discussion in normal households. It's not something that's normalized. And that also forms that layer where people are a bit reluctant to reach out for support. And so that's why we have conversations such as these. So when you talk about stigma, what are some of the barriers you feel that hinder help seeking for people?
Well, I think the first barrier is identifying somebody who's got either suffering depression or addiction issues or more serious mental health problems such as schizophrenia. So there's, on the one hand, there's the family and friends, and on the other hand, it's the individual. Usually the individual, whatever community they're in, can't see their condition. They'll be in denial. That's very common. For family members and friends to be able to discern that somebody is suffering, they have to develop strategies to try and make that person self-aware, because of course to address these issues before, particularly with serious mental health issues, before they become totally self-harming, you have to get the person to see that they have a problem. And that involves very frank and open discussions and not being judgmental, and that's quite hard in any community. For migrants, especially refugee migrants, depression is a very familiar condition because people have often undergone traumatic conditions and that have made them a refugee, war, conflict and so on. Arrive in New Zealand, refugee communities are communities that I've had a lot to deal with in my life as a politician, and even until now I've been very involved in the resettlement of Afghan refugees. For example, I managed to bring some of my former staff, when I worked for 4 years in Afghanistan, to New Zealand in the wave of migrants who came last year that we rescued from Kabul airport. I managed to bring 3 young people that had worked for me in Afghanistan. They have all suffered depression here, but I've guided them through that process. They're fine now, they're working and so on. So I guess that practical experience that I've had just recently dealing with become like family members, it's about identifying the problem, explaining to the person that the problem is quite common, in this case among refugees, and that this is what you can expect will happen. You know, you will miss your family, you'll become very depressed, but it's a process you're moving through. So sort of normalising it,
Yes.
really. That's the key. And I think that comes back to the wider question of mental health issues and addiction. That people will feel, as an individual, they'll feel shame because they'll think people are judging them. So it's really important that we can get the message to individuals that they're ill, in the same way as they had pneumonia or had a bad infection in their leg. It's sort of something that's real. It's nothing to do with being shamed, being weak, or not being strong. It's about making the individual see that they have a condition that's medical, and then addressing how to whether it's medication, whether it's deep counselling. It's very hard. The hardest thing is getting the individual and then the family and friends, because people can make judgments. I don't think it's shameful if one of their family members is suffering from schizophrenia or depression or addiction, and yelling at them, punishing them is not an effective way of addressing it.
No.
Yep.
I think there's public stigma, but there's also self-stigma that people themselves, they feel what other people may be feeling because of them, because how they're feeling or because how they're behaving. And it's around, like you said, it's all individualized, and it's about taking that away and saying, it's mental health is not because of the individual. It's situational, it's environmental. People have gone through so much trauma, and it's not an individual problem. And it takes a community. It takes a community to get the wheels in motion, just to, work towards decreasing stigma around it. And it's a long and challenging process to make people aware that it's okay to reach out for support if you're not feeling well mentally. And it's a long process to normalize mental health and addiction. And from your stories, it's the narrative that you just shared. Those people were very lucky to have someone like you guide them and show them, because it's when people are going through something such as mental illness or if they're unwell mentally, it's very hard to be in denial. It's very easy to be in denial. It's very hard for them to reach out for support, because in our culture we are taught to be strong, we are taught to be positive role models. We can't have any flaws. And the moment we acknowledge, or the moment we disclose that we are not okay, the fear in us to be judged is quite strong. And that's the fear that stops us from reaching out.
And I've very much seen that situation, particularly in the Indian community, where sadly some families have disabled children, and the parents will be in complete denial that there's anything wrong with the 3-year-old, and somehow intervention would help the child, but in fact we have some quite strong institutional problems that people don't recognise, that their preschooler has problems, might be autistic or mildly autistic or physically disabled. Because unless you apply for special funding before the child goes to school, you can't get it after 5. And so talking to a local principal recently, he'd had 4 different migrant families, all from South Asia, who had arrived with 5-year-olds, and had they applied for government funding for assistance with their child before they came to school, they would have had a lot more assistance available afterwards. And it comes back to exactly what you said, that families felt shamed that something was wrong, especially with the little boy, and were unable to accept it, but actually it harmed the child and harmed the child's chances. So yes, it's really important for families to recognise that for mental health conditions and for physical conditions. It's not shameful. It's something that just happens in the same way as somebody can have a heart condition or catch cancer. Well, it's not their fault and it's not the family's fault, but you need to intervene with procedures and medication and counselling that can address those issues.
Yeah. I guess it goes hand in hand about having these discussions that it's okay to reach out for support, but also having discussions about how to access support. Because sometimes they may want to reach out, but they may not know where.
Exactly.
And with reaching out also comes with issues such as language barriers or, cultural issues, cultural factors, cultural implications. Yes.
Exactly.
So both goes hand in hand.
Yep. Yes, exactly. And so I guess the onus then is also on the health department and other support services, some of very worthy NGOs that are involved in support over these areas, to publicise as widely as possible to make that information available. Luckily, almost everyone's online these days, and so Googling is relatively easy to find information. Because there are support services there for issues like mental health and addiction. And these services have a track record of helping people, and that's what people need who've got these conditions.
Absolutely, and in the relevant, languages as well. And because there's also how these information is disseminated. It's around, some people may be tech savvy so they can access this information online. Some people, still want to read, have a hard copy to read. It's also being a bit more creative and I guess innovative in how the information is shared.
Yes.
Yeah. And apart from mental health, there are also issues of addiction out in our community. And I know working for Asha Services in the last 6-7 years, we've seen quite an increase in the number of South Asians accessing our service for because they're experiencing harmful gambling. So what are your thoughts on this topic of gambling and how it's quite prevalent in the community, not just the ethnic community, but quite prevalent out there?
Yes, it is prevalent in all communities, and it's very destructive to families and to individuals. Many of people listening to our program today will be in tight financial situations. Mortgage rates are going up, food prices are increasing, rents are going up. So a lot of families have very little extra disposable income, and so when that income is being wasted, being used by an individual in the family for compulsive gambling, for example, the whole family suffers, and it's often initially quite often hidden. People are not aware that a family member is going to the casino or doing online gambling, but it soon becomes obvious because of the money that's disappeared.
Absolutely.
And that can of course lead to a lot of conflict in the family. Mothers struggling to feed their children and have found their husbands are going to the massage parlour, or of course it could be a sexual addiction, or to the casino or whatever. So it's very destructive. So again, though, that it's very important that the issue is addressed in a sensitive way, because simply one partner fighting with the other over the other person's addiction is not going to lead to a change in behaviour. So again, seeking professional help, most importantly, making the person who's got the addiction see that they have an addiction. I mean, many of your listeners will know how difficult it is to give up smoking. Now, that's in the greater scheme of things, that's not as serious as money going to the casino, but it's still very detrimental to a person's health. And people struggle even to give up smoking. But it's
absolutely.
And so you have to reach a point where the person who's got the addiction wants to change, and that often is the hardest step, but the most important first step.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's also quite okay to, being scared or being nervous about reaching out for support to a health professional because they don't know what to expect, and that's also okay. But what's not okay is if they don't reach out for the support that they need, and what's not okay is if they bottle it up That's not okay.
Or go into total denial that it's not a problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, like you said, it's, not only financial. When people are experiencing harm from gambling, it can also be social, social harm. Families, friends are being impacted. It can also be, apart from financial, it can also affect their work, their studies, their own mental well-being, emotional well-being, and their physical health. So it's not only money that's going, it's that's they're spending. It's also a whole raft of issues, and research suggests that for every one person who's gambling, it affects 5 to 7 other people. And these are people, in their circle, their whānau, their wider whānau. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things.
And extraordinarily destructive on relationships. That partners will, husbands or wives will lose trust in their partner if this continues, and that wider harm that then spreads out to the whole family.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, pokies, gambling at the pokies is the most harmful form of gambling. Apart from, of course, there's also, sports betting. There's also table games at the casino. But gambling at the pokies is the most harmful form of gambling.
Well, I think the most critical thing is, first of all, recognising there's a problem there, then getting the individual who's addicted to see that there's a problem, and then for the family and the friends to seek help. And the Ministry of Health provides really professional support organisations that we've referenced already, that people should go online to see what support is available and begin a series of treatment. It's the same as if a person had pneumonia or cancer or a heart condition, that you begin a series of treatments to try and resolve the issue. Well, mental health and addiction is the same. It's just the challenge of getting the individual to accept that they've got an illness. A physical illness is easy because you can see it and feel it. A mental illness is much harder to recognise, even in the individual who's affected.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to talk about it, and important to raise awareness about it. It's important to educate communities about mental health and addiction, so that we are able to better support our people, people who reach out, and also messages of that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay at certain times in your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you know yourself better than anyone else. So if you're not feeling well, if you're not feeling well mentally, then please go with it. Don't push it to one side, because if it's left, if you don't do anything about it, it can have some serious consequences on yourself.
And it's not showing weakness to admit you've got it. Actually, it's showing strength.
Absolutely.
It's having the courage to recognise that you yourself need help. And that's not shameful, it's actually courageous.
I agree 100%. Vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage.
Exactly.
So
we're 100% on that.
We are. So please reach out for support. Please reach out if you know someone who's experiencing harm from gambling, or you yourself are experiencing harm. Please reach out. We're here to support you. You can call us on our 0800 number, 0800 862 342, and press 6 for Hindi or Fijian Hindi. We at Asha Services, we provide culturally appropriate service for our South Asian community who are impacted by gambling. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. Before we go, tell us, you can tell our audience how you look after your mental well-being. What are some of the things that you do to...
Well, I'm an obsessive gardener.
Oh, great.
So I very much like vegetable gardening, particularly. And
any vegetable in particular?
Well, I worked for the United Nations in Myanmar for 4 years, but prior to that 4 years in Kabul. But in Myanmar I discovered how gorgeous okra or ladyfinger is.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to grow okra in my house, in my garden in Te Atatu, but you really need a lot of heat so to make it grow. And I think it's the most delicious vegetable. And so I'm keen on that. And I'm also very keen on composting. So I get coffee grinds from the local coffee shop on Lincoln Road, and I mix it with lawn clippings, and I go up to the local horse paddock and collect horse manure and mix it all up, and it makes great compost for my garden.
Nice.
So that's my therapy, gardening.
Gardening, okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for your time. So through these conversations, please, mental health is just as important as your physical health. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you. It's okay to reach out for support. It's okay to not be okay at certain times in your life. But what's not okay is if you don't get the help that you need. What's not okay is if you bottle it up. So please reach out. You can call us on 0800 862 342 and press 6 for Hindi. Thank you.